Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
Let's go back to the idea of themes. I think one of the themes in Joshua is leadership matters.
Yeah.
Because God used a human, Joshua, to lead the Israelites. As long as Joshua led well, the people were victorious. But there was a time where we see that Joshua failed. Do you remember what that was?
No. What was that?
And when he failed, the people suffered. The deception at Gibeon.
Oh, yeah. Was that him personally, or was it the elders you promised them?
I think that.
Why don't you describe the story for our readers quickly in case and where it is so they can follow along.
Well, I have to find it myself.
Chapter 9, Joshua 9, the Gibeonite deception.
Yeah.
So the people from Gibeon come out. Everyone's terrified of them because the Israelites are, so strong and powerful. So they come out and
they come up with a plan to deceive the Israelites by making them think they're from a far off land and saying, let's live in peace together. Let's sign a peace treaty. And the failure of Joshua appears to be verse 15.
Oh, yeah.
Verse 14. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord.
Yeah, I highlighted that.
And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them.
But did not
counsel from the Lord. Joshua's one of the, he's like Daniel. There's a couple people in the Bible you don't really see blatant sin.
Joseph.
You see like failure, like you do in Abraham's life when he lies,
Yeah.
Joshua, it's really hard to find his sin, but this is one of the places that, it says he didn't ask counsel from the Lord. It's like if he would have gone to God, God would have said, no, these people are like your neighbors.
Yeah, they're one of the people I want you to conquer. They're trying to deceive you. Right. But you're right. It's only a few characters, right? Daniel's like that. Joseph is like that. They're all types of Christ. They all point to Christ, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's Job because he's innocent and he suffers is like that, but he isn't without flaws. True. But yeah, this is definitely a flaw. We're like, nope, you blew it. You made a mistake. But then he keeps his covenant with them, though, right? And he just asks them later in verse 22, why'd you deceive us? They're like, well, because you're killing everybody and we thought we were going to die, right? Okay, then they become, I love this, woodcutters and drawers of water.
Right.
Chop that wood, carry water.
Right. Which is important, right? Because they're kind of building they have to build houses and build lots of buildings and water is definitely very important. And then in the book of Joshua, we also see where they stop eating manna.
That's
earlier. I forget what chapter it is, but it says that they ate like their first meal in the promised land, I think. And as soon as they ate that meal that came from, help me find it.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for it now. Where is that?
Might be chapter 2.
It's got to be early on because I'm thinking what the significance of that is like, okay, now I'm not going to give this manna from heaven every morning to feed you. You got to go, fend for yourselves, or you got to go get some food.
Yeah, so let's find this. Where is it?
Rahab is in chapter 2.
It's maybe it's chapter 4 or 5.
Yeah, I don't know. This is crossing of the Jordan and the stones.
Yeah,
chapter.
it seems like it would be after that.
The new chapter 5, they're circumcised. The first Passover. Maybe it's in chapter
First
5.
Passover.
10.
Yep, this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it.
here it is. Yeah.
This
And the
is it. Yeah.
day after the Passover, this is chapter 5, verse 11. The day after the Passover.
On that very day, they ate the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain, and the manna ceased the day after they ate of the produce of the land, and there was no longer manna for the people of Israel, but they ate the fruit of the land of Canaan that year.
Yeah, that's a big event.
Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of interesting.
You know,
So I
and
think another big theme in the book is, just God fulfills his promises.
yeah,
The word promise, it appears at least 14 times in the book of Joshua, because God promised the land of Canaan to the Israelites. And this is all about God making good on his promises.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole notion of actually I was thinking about this during our Bible study yesterday. We were looking at the maps and as we are going to the book of Deuteronomy, just the whole the way God's provision worked out for the nation of Israel. You're going to be in captivity for 400 years, but by the end of 400 years of captivity in Egypt, they had grown to like 1 million people, right? And
Yeah.
then with Moses, let my people go. 1 million people start walking, and if you look at the map, you're leaving the place of Egypt where there's food production, there's agriculture, there's a whole system for providing food for 1 million people, and you start walking in the desert. You think just from a historical, archaeological perspective, the 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 incredulity of that. I mean, 1 million people wandering from a fertile plain to go in the desert, they're not going to last like a week. It's going to be
It's
like a week and a half. Like you're
it's
just
no
going to walk.
wonder.
There's no
Yeah.
food production. You can't possibly sustain life in the
No
desert.
wonder they grumbled so much.
Well, they did, but God provided the water from the rock and the manna from heaven, all that kind of stuff. But you think if you were a secular archaeologist looking at that, you'd say the whole thing is farcical because there's no way people could wander away from um, and replicate that kind of food production in the desert, let alone the water. It just can't happen. And yet, I was looking at the thing for Joshua. They said, yeah, in this time, look, they're trying to date the book of Joshua. There were all kinds of small camps and settlements around there. They find it archaeological digs from a people that ostensibly did not eat pork. Because you know, in the archaeology, that was not part of their diet, right? So they were, this the historical event happened, the Exodus out of Egypt to this point where but God has fed them with manna all this time and sustained them with water in the desert wilderness all this time. It's so miraculous on its face that you'd say if you're like the archaeologists say I can't I can't believe it, but yet God did it.
Mm. Yeah, it
So
is. Yeah, that it is amazing. Well, the whole story of Jericho and how they conquered Jericho, it falling in on the walls falling down
yeah,
after they marched around it, except for around Rahab's house because she had the scarlet um, cord on the window, um, which some people say that scarlet cord represents Christ, is
oh
sort of a type of Christ because um, she by faith put it out there to identify so they could know where she lived, but then her house was not destroyed,
yeah,
and so I you know I don't have strong feelings about that necessarily. But I think another theme is about faith. That true faith requires action. I mean, just think about the fall of Jericho. Um, I mean, God told them to march around the city, right? And they did it. They actually did it.
that's
I
right.
mean, they could have been like, "No, we're not going
Yeah,
to do
we're not doing
that. That's silly."
that. That's crazy.
Um,
Yeah, they took action.
they took action. Even when they crossed the Jordan River at flood stage, it says in chapter 3, they took action. You know, um, So, and there's all kinds of, in chapter 11, there's a battle where they were way outnumbered, but they still went to battle. So, at the same time, another theme is disobedience leads to disaster, which
Is
you
that
mentioned earlier in chapter
yeah.
7 with Achan's sin. That one guy's disobedience, caused them to lose battles. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that story
Well,
of Achan?
it's just interesting, guys, because part of this is, because a big theme here that I don't know if you're going to address it when you teach on this in a couple of weeks, Greg, but like all these bloody battles, right? And can God conquering people and wiping them out? It's hard to read as a modern believer, right? And what God is doing. And one of the things I was reading about, because it's difficult, is
It is difficult.
yeah, and God's like, he does not he does tell him, say, I want you to go conquer these nations in the promised land. I don't want you to go to war with people outside the promised land. This is for very clear purpose for my promise to you. But it's also like saying it's not they were involved in incredible evil. So God is like, you are my instrument of judgment against their incredible evil, but you are also capable of incredible evil. Like you see with Achan, like, and I'm not going to be tolerant of it with you either. And so if you're not following me that way, there's going to be consequence for that as well. So that's um I think part of that understanding of that is God's moral standard that all of us, every nation, every individual in every nation have fallen short of, and essentially everyone deserves. It's not like Canaan was somehow the people there were somehow singled out, or they were just they were singled out, but it's not like somehow that their sin was worse than any of us. So we all deserve that kind of. If God was truly just, the sword would fall on all of us for all of our
He'd wipe
sins.
us all out.
That's right.
Yeah.
He wiped us all out. He'd bring back the
None,
flood if
none
he
of
was
us.
really just. Right.
But it is important though to recognize that the Canaanites were extremely evil. I mean, they were performing child sacrifice.
Right.
I mean, all kinds of things that uh, we would not tolerate. Any nation would not uh, tolerate. I mean, the closest thing is like when we hear about ISIS and some of the things that they
Yeah.
that they do, and I'm sure, um, yeah, it is a hard it is hard to swallow when you read some of these verses that talk about um, don't leave anyone alive. But then they were told not to take any of the spoils. But then this one guy, he gets greedy, and he
Mm-hmm.
just couldn't resist, and then he takes it home and buries it, um, with his family, obviously participating in it too, um, knowing that he took it and probably helped him dig the hole to hide it. And
What do you think
then they
about the
get
way Joshua talks to him in that? In the end, he says, "Just be honest with me. Tell me everything. Don't hold back." Did you catch that at the end? Joshua's almost like, and then of course
yeah, this is chapter 7. What verse are you talking about?
let me find it because they kind of like they cast lots to say which group, which family, which they keep narrowing it down until they get to him,
Yeah.
right? And say this is chapter 7, verse 19. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, give glory to the Lord of God of Israel and give praise to him, and tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me." Almost like real tender.
Yeah.
And when he does say it, they say, this is chapter 25. Joshua said, "Why did you bring trouble on us? The Lord brings trouble on you today." And all Israel stoned him with stones. They burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. It's kind of a little, I mean, it just seemed a little odd the tone Joshua takes. I don't know if there's a spiritual lesson for you, Greg, or if you want to bring it up in Bible study when you're teaching. It just seemed odd to me that he says, "No, no, you tell me anything. It's okay. And it's
Yeah,
just tell me, it'll be fine."
just tell me. Yeah,
Oh
you'll be
yeah,
fine.
yeah. Oh, I
That's
can't
that.
believe. Oh my gosh, what did you
Yeah.
do? Everybody, stone. You
Yeah.
know, but yeah, I think the spiritual lesson is like God's righteous law is absolutely 100% holy and righteous, and if He really kept to it, all of us would suffer this fate because we all deserve it.
Mm, yeah.
So
That is, yeah, no, um,
just one of those random Bible observations, Greg. I don't know if it goes anywhere. Just I
I
just thought
will,
quirky.
I will say the story of Achan reminds me of, is it Acts chapter 5, the
Yes,
Ananias and Sapphira? It kind of reminds me of that. And just
very
like
similar.
God is kind of setting an example that he really hates sin. And if we all got what we deserve, none of us would be.
Do you want to summarize that Ananias and Sapphira again for listeners that might not remember the story?
You can.
Well, everyone's supposed to give to the Lord, and they held back.
Yeah.
And then they said, like, why are you holding back? You didn't have to.
Yeah,
You didn't.
they made it look like they sold property and gave all the proceeds
Right,
back, but they only gave part of it back, and
right,
they kept some for themselves. And so they were deceptive to the early church and the church leaders, and yet the Holy Spirit made it clear, to the church leaders that they lied and deceived, and they paid for it with their lives, you know.
right.
So it's one of those, again, it's a similar story of this. It's like it's an extreme example. And you think, man, if God did this, like imagine today if everybody that took something from somebody that didn't belong to them, would anybody be alive?
Well, I think this is the difficulty in reading it. The modern reader looks at this and says, "Oh, come on, it's one little transgression. Why can't God be a reasonable God and just like it's not that big of a yes, we all make mistakes. And why can't God be more like Santa Claus, where no one gets a lump of coal? Yeah, yeah. I got the naughty list and the nice list, but at the end of the day, no one gets a lump of coal. You're all okay." And and I think a lot of Christians look at it that way. That God's a reasonable God. So a few things here and there. Yeah, you took some silver bars, you hit them under your tent. Who hasn't done that? Come on, it's okay. Let's just forget about it, be friends. And the God of the Bible, I love it. Our pastor at our church talks about this. He said, read the Old Testament. They didn't treat God like your buddy that you put your arm around and kind of say, joke around with. They treated God like the way we treat a live electrical wire that's snapped from a high tension wire from a utility pole and is bouncing around the ground and sparking and flooding. That's the way they treated God, like with reverence and awe, right? And to be fair, there's many different ways to understand God. He is our Father, He is our friend, He is our holy God. But the holy standard of God it's not this kind of reasonable God that bends the rules now and again to let you in. The holy standard of God is absolutely holy. It's only because Jesus met the standard for us on our behalf as our substitute that we have any prayer at all. You can't throw yourself in the mercy of reasonable God and say, "Oh God, come on, sinner like me, there should stand a chance with a reasonable God like you." It doesn't work that way. And it's not just an Old Testament thing. I just like that is through and through. God is an absolute 100% holy God. Jesus said, "I didn't come to abolish the law. I came to complete and fulfill the law for you on your behalf." So maybe there's a gospel angle, Greg, if you want to think about when you're talking about this in a couple of weeks. But stories like this kind of show, like, wow, God seems so unreasonable. He kills this guy for, like, this God is holy, and
Yeah. No,
you
I
say, well,
like
got to be fair. Okay, well, if he was fair, we'd all deserve that.
I really like what you just shared, and it makes me think of even one of the things where we love talking about, which is how the gospel changes us from the inside out, and that we need to grow in our awareness of the depth of our sinfulness, but
Right,
also the height of God's holiness.
right,
That God is way more. We need to become. We need to become more and more aware of the holiness of God. But at the same time, as we do that, we also become more and more aware of the depth of our own sinfulness.
right,
And and all of us should at that point cry out, who can save us? What hope is there for me? The
right.
only hope is Jesus.
That's right.
And the same Jesus that died for your sins, is the same Jesus that helps you mature as a follower of Jesus. a follower of God.
Yeah, because
So
you grow in the gratitude of how I can't believe how he filled that gap for me, right? He's the one who
that's
closed
right.
filled that gap for me, right? So, and then as you're one other thing, Greg, we talk about this a lot. The is you grow in your appreciation for His holiness. Like you read a passage like this, gosh, God is so holy. It should make you appreciate that that is the holiness that He gives to you and I in the great exchange. I mean, the gospel says, all my sin is put on Jesus, but all of His righteousness is put on me. So when the Father judges me, and the Father will judge me, He'll look at me through the lens of Jesus's blood and say, wow, not only did you not do anything wrong, you are so righteous, not because of me, but because of the gift of righteousness. So the more you appreciate God's actual righteousness, it should make you just filled with wonder, awe, and joy, because that is the righteousness He gives to you in the gospel. That's your standing. It's not just the wiping away of your bad stuff. It's the giving to you of all of Jesus's good stuff. It's just amazing. So passages like this, I think at first blush you could say, whoa, what is this? A little offensive. What does it mean? I think if you dig a little deeper, there's a lot of hope and joy you can see in this.
It's getting late. I think that that might be a great place to stop.
Let's wrap. There's a lot more here. I love it. And it sounds like from the way you started, you're going to get to the end where he says this, like the choice at the end is kind of final sermon, his final talk at the end about Father Lords, because there's a lot of great stories here, like Jericho and the Battle of Ai, different ones, but and the sun standing still. We didn't even talk about that one, right?
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so cool stories. But I think at the end he says, choose a state whom you'll serve. That's kind of it's all leading up to that.
You got to serve somebody.
And the
As
words of
that great theologian
Bob Dylan,
Bob Dylan,
you're gonna
you
have to
got to
serve somebody.
You got to serve somebody.
That's right.
And it's funny because um, I'm reading through another book about it's actually on the topic of hell and
Oh boy.
and how it speaks about how kind of against the idea that hell is like God is like sending people to hell and he takes great pleasure. He's like, ha ha ha, you get to go to hell. Da, da, da. No, that hell is like a freely chosen place that people choose to go to. That's
Right.
they just don't want to be with God. And I'm trying to think how this ties in with what I was just
No,
sharing.
I'll say because when he says at the end, choose a state whom you serve, I was actually kind of making that point earlier. The notion that God says you don't have to be with me if you don't want to. I'm not
Yeah.
going to force you to be with me, right? I want you with me. I adore you. I love you for all eternity. Like when Jesus says later, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how many times I wanted to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. If you don't want to be with me in all eternity, you don't have to be. So people in
It's
hell,
a
the door,
choice.
this choice, and this is the C.S. Lewis's statement that all the doors of hell are locked from the inside.
Mm,
People say, "I don't want to be with a. You think you're better than me? Look, I'm not a bad person, and no one tells me what to do. The two great sins, right? And to come to the Lord at some point to taste and see the Lord is good. You got to say, maybe I'm not a great person. I need salvation, and maybe I'm willing to surrender to someone who's greater than me, so someone can tell me what to do. And those are the very two things that human beings don't want to do. Those are the two great sins, right? God says, okay. How could I possibly be more fair than this? If you don't want to admit those things and you don't want to be with me, you don't have to.
yeah. So I love this quote from Tim Keller. He says, "Hell is a freely chosen identity based on something else besides God going on forever."
That's right. So
Hell
he's
is a freely chosen identity based on something else besides God going on forever.
so for our listeners, some of the thoughts I just had on hell are from Keller's incredible sermon that he has on hell in a series. I think it's freely available on their website, but it's about how can you believe? But a lot of his thoughts and are in turn taken from C.S. Lewis on how what hell is and how hell works.
Mm. Yep. So the challenge of Joshua: choose this day who you will serve.
Take the offer.
Are you gonna serve God, or are you gonna serve somebody else? It's funny that Joshua kind of ends the books that way, because think about that encounter he had. That's basically
Oh, right. That's the kind of he had. That's the choice.
Yeah.
That's great. I never put that together. That's great, Greg.
Yeah.
You're right.
I wonder if in his mind, when he said that, choose this day who you're going to serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And that's basically what he said. I'm going to serve the Lord of the commander of the Lord's army.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.